What happens when one of television's most outspoken hosts meets an actor who refuses to back down from his beliefs? The tension in Studio 1A was so thick you could cut it with a knife as Jonathan Roumie, star of the hit series The Chosen, sat across from Joy Behar on The View. What started as a routine promotional interview quickly spiraled into the most explosive confrontation the show has ever witnessed, ultimately leading to a decision that would shock the entertainment world forever. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what you think about celebrity confrontations on live television. The morning began like any other Tuesday taping of The View. The producers had scheduled Jonathan Roumie to discuss his portrayal of Jesus in The Chosen and his upcoming projects. What they didn't anticipate was how quickly the conversation would veer into uncharted territory. Joy Behar, known for her quick wit and no-nonsense approach, seemed particularly animated that morning, her coffee cup steaming as she shuffled through her notes. "So, Jonathan," Joy began with what appeared to be a friendly smile, "you've made quite a name for yourself, playing, well, the most famous figure in history. Tell us, how does it feel to essentially make a living off of religion?" The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Jonathan, dressed in a simple navy blazer and white shirt, leaned back slightly in his chair. His expression remained calm, but there was something in his eyes that suggested he'd heard variations of this question before, and not always with innocent intentions. "Well, Joy, I appreciate the question, though I'd frame it differently," Jonathan replied, his voice measured and steady. "I don't see it as making a living off religion. I see it as telling stories that matter, stories that have shaped civilization for thousands of years. The Chosen isn't about making money from faith. It's about bringing these ancient stories to life in a way that resonates with modern audiences." Joy's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. She tapped her pen against her index cards, a habit the longtime viewers of The View had come to recognize as a sign that she was preparing for battle. "But let's be honest here, Jonathan," she pressed, leaning forward slightly. "You're essentially capitalizing on people's religious beliefs. The show has generated millions of dollars, and you're the face of it. Doesn't that make you uncomfortable, profiting from something that's supposed to be sacred?" The other hosts, Whoopi Goldberg, Sarah Haynes, and Alyssa Farah Griffin, exchanged quick glances. They could sense the shift in the room's energy. This wasn't going to be the light, promotional interview they had expected. Jonathan took a slow breath, his hands clasped loosely in his lap. When he spoke, his voice carried a quiet intensity that seemed to command attention from everyone in the studio. "Joy, I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding in your question that I need to address. You're suggesting that telling these stories somehow diminishes their sacredness, or that finding meaning and purpose in your work is inherently wrong if that work involves faith. By that logic, should we criticize every actor who's ever portrayed a historical figure? Every filmmaker who's made a movie about love? Every musician who's written a song about hope? That's not what I'm saying," Joy shot back, her voice rising slightly. "What I'm saying is that religion has been used to manipulate people for centuries. And now we have entertainment that does the same thing, just with better production values." The studio fell silent, except for the hum of the cameras. Even the audience seemed to hold its breath. Jonathan's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. A spark of what might have been disappointment mixed with determination. "Joy, I have to respectfully push back on that characterization," he said, his voice still calm, but carrying more weight now. "What you're describing sounds like cynicism masquerading as insight. Yes, throughout history, some people have twisted faith for their own purposes. But that doesn't invalidate the genuine experiences of millions of people who find hope, community, and purpose through their beliefs." Joy waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, please, Jonathan. You can dress it up however you want. But at the end of the day, you're selling people a fantasy. And frankly, I think it's irresponsible in today's world to promote magical thinking. The tension in the room ratcheted up another notch. Whoopi shifted uncomfortably in her chair, clearly sensing that this conversation was heading somewhere none of them had anticipated. Sarah Haynes glanced nervously at the producers off camera, while Alyssa seemed transfixed by the unfolding drama. Jonathan leaned forward slightly, his composure still intact but his voice taking on a more pointed tone. Joy, I'm curious about something. You seem very passionate about dismissing the beliefs of others as fantasy or magical thinking. But isn't that exactly the kind of intolerance that you and this show often speak out against? When did it become acceptable to mock what brings meaning to people's lives, as long as it's religious meaning? Joy's eyes flashed. Don't you dare try to turn this around on me. I'm not mocking anyone. I'm asking legitimate questions about an industry that preys on people's vulnerabilities. An industry that preys on vulnerabilities? Jonathan repeated, his eyebrows rising slightly. Joy, with all due respect, we're sitting in a television studio where people make their living discussing politics, relationships, and social issues, often in ways designed to provoke emotional responses from viewers. If we're going to talk about industries that capitalize on human nature, perhaps we should examine the media landscape more broadly. The audience began to murmur, some clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Joy's face was flushing slightly, and her grip on her pen had tightened visibly. You know what, Jonathan? I think you're being deliberately obtuse, she said, her voice sharp now. There's a difference between entertainment and exploitation. And when you convince people that they need to believe in ancient myths to find purpose in life, that's exploitation. Jonathan sat back in his chair, and for the first time since the interview began, he smiled. But it wasn't a warm smile. It was the kind of smile someone gives when they've just realized exactly who they're dealing with. Ancient myths, he repeated slowly. Joy, I want to make sure I understand your position clearly. Are you suggesting that the teachings about love, forgiveness, compassion, and service to others that form the core of these stories, regardless of one's beliefs about their literal truth, are harmful to society? Joy opened her mouth to respond, but Jonathan continued, his voice gaining momentum. Because if that's your position, then I think we need to have a very different conversation about what kinds of messages you think entertainment should be promoting instead. Quote, the cameras captured every micro-expression as Joy's face went through a series of emotions, surprise, irritation, and something that looked dangerously close to rage. The other hosts sat frozen, unsure whether to intervene or let this train wreck continue to unfold. Don't lecture me about what messages entertainment should promote, Joy snapped, her professional composure finally beginning to crack. I've been in this business longer than you've been alive, and I know manipulation when I see it. Jonathan's calm demeanor never wavered, which seemed to irritate Joy even more. Joy, I'm not trying to lecture you. I'm genuinely trying to understand your perspective. But what I'm hearing sounds less like thoughtful criticism and more like prejudice disguised as intellectual superiority. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Whoopi finally found her voice, attempting to steer the conversation back to safer ground. Okay. Let's maybe take a step back here, Whoopi interjected. But Joy wasn't finished. Prejudice? Joy's voice rose to a level that made several audience members shift in their seats. You want to talk about prejudice? How about the prejudice of telling people they're broken if they don't subscribe to your particular brand of ancient superstition? Jonathan's response was immediate and delivered with surgical precision. Joy, I've never told anyone they're broken. In fact, the entire message of The Chosen is the opposite. That people are valuable, loved, and worthy of redemption regardless of their circumstances. But what I'm witnessing right now is someone who seems to believe that anyone who finds meaning in faith is somehow intellectually inferior. If we're going to discuss prejudice, perhaps we should start there. The silence that followed Jonathan's words was deafening. Joy's face had gone from flushed to pale, her mouth opening and closing as if she couldn't quite process what had just been said to her on national television. The other hosts looked like deer caught in headlights, and even the studio audience seemed to collectively hold its breath. "Excuse me?" Joy finally managed, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Did you just accuse me of being prejudiced on my own show?" Jonathan didn't flinch. "I didn't accuse you of anything, Joy. You've spent the last 10 minutes suggesting that people of faith are either gullible, broken, or intellectually inferior. If someone made similar statements about any other group of people, what would you call it?" Joy's hands were visibly shaking now, whether from anger or something else entirely. "I am not prejudiced. I am a rational person asking rational questions about irrational beliefs." "And there it is again," Jonathan said quietly. "You've just labeled the beliefs of billions of people as irrational. You're essentially saying that anyone who doesn't see the world exactly as you do is fundamentally flawed in their thinking." Whoopi tried again to intervene. "Jonathan, I think what Joy is trying to say is—" "No," Joy cut her off, her voice now carrying a sharp edge that made everyone in the studio tense up. "No, Whoopi, I can speak for myself. And what I'm saying, Jonathan, is that, in an age of science and reason, clinging to Bronze Age mythology is not just irrational, it's dangerous." The audience gasped audibly. Even by the View's standards, this was unprecedented territory. Jonathan's expression shifted subtly, and for the first time, there was a hint of steel in his voice. "Bronze Age mythology," he repeated. "Joy, I want you to listen to yourself for a moment. You're on national television, dismissing the foundational beliefs of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam as Bronze Age mythology. You're talking about belief systems that have inspired some of history's greatest works of art, literature, and music, that have motivated countless acts of charity and sacrifice, that have provided comfort to the dying and hope to the desperate." Joy leaned forward aggressively. "Yes, I am. Because that same mythology has also justified wars, oppression, and hatred. It's been used to subjugate women, persecute minorities, and stifle scientific progress. So yes, I think it's dangerous." Jonathan nodded slowly. "You're absolutely right about some of that, Joy. Religion has been misused throughout history. But so has science. So has politics. So has virtually every human institution. The atomic bomb was created by scientists. Totalitarian regimes have used political ideology to commit genocide. Does that mean we should dismiss all science and politics as dangerous mythology?" "That's completely different," Joy snapped. But Jonathan wasn't finished. "Is it? You're using the worst examples of religious abuse to condemn all religious belief, while ignoring the countless positive contributions faith has made to human civilization. That's not rational analysis, Joy. That's selective reasoning designed to support a predetermined conclusion." The other hosts were now openly staring at this intellectual cage match unfolding before them. Sarah Haynes looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair, while Alyssa seemed mesmerized by the verbal sparring. Joy's voice rose again. "You know what, Jonathan? I'm tired of people like you hiding behind intellectual arguments to defend the indefensible. Your show, your whole career, is built on selling people false hope." "False hope?" Jonathan's voice remained controlled, but there was an intensity building beneath the surface. "Joy, let me ask you something. What hope are you selling? What message does your worldview offer to someone who's struggling, someone who's lost, someone who's facing their own mortality?" Joy's response came without hesitation. "Reality. Truth. The courage to face life without fairy tales. And what does that reality look like, Joy? What truth are you offering? That life is meaningless? That suffering is pointless? That when we die, we simply cease to exist? That love is just chemical reactions and human connection is just evolutionary programming?" Joy's eyes were blazing now. "Yes, if that's what the evidence suggests. At least it's honest. Jonathan leaned back slightly. And when he spoke, his voice carried a note of something that sounded almost like sadness. Joy, do you realize what you just said? You're sitting here telling millions of viewers that honesty requires them to believe that their lives are ultimately meaningless, that their deepest experiences of love and connection are illusions, that their hopes for something beyond this existence are childish fantasies. I'm telling them the truth, Joy shot back. Whose truth? Jonathan asked. Your truth? Because last I checked, the questions of meaning, purpose, and what happens after death are still open questions that science hasn't definitively answered. You're not presenting facts, Joy. You're presenting your personal philosophy and claiming it's the only rational position. Joy's composure was completely gone now. Her voice cracked slightly as she responded. Don't you dare psychoanalyze me. I know exactly what I believe and why I believe it. I'm not psychoanalyzing you, Jonathan replied calmly. I'm pointing out that you're doing exactly what you accuse religious people of doing. You're taking a leap of faith in your own worldview and then claiming it's the only logical position. It's not a leap of faith, Joy practically shouted. It's based on evidence and reason. What evidence, Joy? What scientific study has proven that life has no ultimate meaning? What laboratory experiment has demonstrated that love is nothing more than brain chemistry? What peer-reviewed research has established that consciousness ends at death? The questions hung in the air like accusations. Joy opened her mouth to respond but seemed to struggle for words. For perhaps the first time in her television career, Joy Behar appeared to be genuinely speechless. Jonathan continued, his voice gentle but relentless. The truth is, Joy, you have faith in meaninglessness, the same way religious people have faith in meaning. The difference is that you've convinced yourself that your faith is somehow more intellectually honest. Whoopi made one final attempt to salvage the situation. I think we're all getting a little heated here. Maybe we should. No, Joy interrupted, her voice now carrying a tremor that suggested she was close to tears, or rage, or both. No, I want to finish this. Jonathan, let me tell you something. I have spent decades fighting against the kind of thinking you represent. I have watched religion destroy families, oppress women, and justify hatred. And I will not sit here and be lectured by some actor who makes money pretending to be Jesus. The words hit like a physical blow. The audience gasped, and even the camera operators seemed to shift uncomfortably. Jonathan's face remained composed, but something fundamental had changed in his demeanor. Joy, he said quietly, I want to make sure I understand what just happened here. Did you just reduce my entire career, my education, my life's work, and my personal convictions to making money pretending to be Jesus? Joy's face was flushed again, but this time it seemed less like anger and more like the realization that she had crossed a line she couldn't uncross. I didn't mean... No, I think you meant exactly what you said, Jonathan interrupted, his voice still calm but carrying an edge that hadn't been there before. And I think this conversation has revealed far more about your character than it has about mine. The studio fell into a silence so complete that the hum of the air conditioning seemed deafening. Joy's eyes were wide, and for the first time since the interview began, she seemed to realize that she had not just lost the argument, but had revealed something about herself that perhaps she hadn't intended to show to the world. Jonathan's words seemed to echo in the stunned silence, and Joy's face went through a kaleidoscope of emotions. Shame, defiance, anger, and something that looked disturbingly like panic. Her hands were gripping the edge of the table so tightly her knuckles had gone white. How dare you, she whispered, her voice barely audible but somehow more menacing than when she had been shouting. How dare you sit there and judge my character? Jonathan's response was immediate and unflinching. Joy, I'm not judging your character. I'm responding to your actions. You just spent 20 minutes attacking the beliefs of billions of people, questioning my integrity, and then dismissing my life's work as pretending to be Jesus for money. If you're uncomfortable with how that reflects on your character, perhaps you should examine why you said it, not blame me for pointing it out. The other hosts were frozen in place, clearly recognizing that they were witnessing something unprecedented. Whoopi's face showed genuine concern. Sarah looked like she might be sick, and Alyssa seemed torn between fascination and horror. Joy's breathing had become visibly shallow, and when she spoke again, her voice carried a brittle quality that suggested she was barely holding herself together. You think you're so superior, don't you? You think your little fantasy makes you better than the rest of us who have to live in the real world. Joy, I never said anything about being superior to anyone, Jonathan replied, his voice maintaining that same calm tone that seemed to infuriate Joy even more. But I am curious about something. You keep talking about the real world as if it's some terrible place where hope and meaning are luxuries we can't afford. Is that really how you see life? Is that really the message you want to send to people who are watching this right now, struggling with their own challenges? Joy's laugh was sharp and bitter. Oh, that's rich coming from someone who gets paid to tell people that if they just believe hard enough, everything will work out fine. I've never told anyone that, Jonathan said quietly. In fact, the entire message of The Chosen is quite the opposite. It shows people facing real struggles, real pain, real loss, and finding ways to persist through it. It doesn't promise that belief makes life easy. It suggests that meaning can be found even in the midst of suffering. Joy stood up abruptly, her chair rolling backward, with enough force to bang into the backdrop behind her. The sudden movement startled everyone in the studio, including the cameramen who quickly adjusted their shots to follow her. I can't do this, she said, her voice now openly trembling. I cannot sit here and listen to this sanctimonious garbage anymore. Whoopi immediately stood as well, reaching out toward Joy. No, Whoopi, Joy snapped, pulling away from her co-host's attempted touch. I will not take a breath. I will not calm down. And I will not pretend that this is normal. She turned back to face Jonathan, who had remained seated, watching her with an expression that seemed more concerned than confrontational. You want to know about the real world, Jonathan? Joy's voice was rising again, but now it carried an edge of desperation. The real world is where children die of cancer while their parents pray uselessly to your imaginary friend. The real world is where good people suffer and bad people prosper, regardless of how much faith they have. The real world is where women are told they're less than men because of verses in your precious book. Jonathan's voice, when he responded, was gentler than it had been all morning. Joy, you're right about all of those things. The world can be cruel and unfair and heartbreaking. But does acknowledging that cruelty require us to abandon hope? Does recognizing injustice mean we have to tell people their search for meaning is worthless? Joy's response was immediate and vehement. Yes, if that search leads them away from actually solving problems. Yes, if it makes them accept injustice because they think some cosmic father figure will make it all better eventually. But what if it doesn't? Jonathan asked. What if faith actually motivates people to fight harder against injustice? What if believing in ultimate meaning gives them the strength to persist when fighting seems hopeless? What if the comfort they find in prayer helps them cope with grief so they can continue living and loving? Joy's face contorted with something that looked like physical pain. Stop it, she said, her voice cracking. Just stop it. Joy, what's really bothering you here? Jonathan's voice was now openly compassionate. Because this feels like more than an intellectual disagreement about religion. The question seemed to break something inside Joy. Tears began streaming down her face, and her voice became a mixture of rage and anguish. What's bothering me is that I have spent my entire career fighting against the kind of magical thinking that keeps people from taking responsibility for their own lives and their own world. And now I have to sit here and watch millions of people eat it up because it comes wrapped in beautiful cinematography and good acting. Jonathan stood slowly, his movement deliberate and non-threatening. Joy, can I ask you something? What are you afraid will happen if people find comfort in these stories? The question seemed to hit Joy like a physical blow. She stared at him for a long moment, her tears flowing freely now. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I'm afraid they'll stop fighting. I'm afraid they'll stop questioning. I'm afraid they'll become sheep. Jonathan nodded slowly. And I'm afraid that if they stop believing in anything larger than themselves, they'll stop caring about anyone other than themselves. I'm afraid they'll lose hope. I'm afraid they'll despair. The two of them stood there, facing each other across the coffee table, representing two fundamentally different worldviews that seemed impossible to reconcile. The silence stretched on until Joy suddenly turned toward the cameras. I can't do this anymore, she announced, her voice now steady despite her tears. I cannot continue to be part of a show that gives a platform to this kind of thinking. I cannot pretend that all viewpoints are equally valid when some of them are actively harmful to human progress. Whoopi stepped forward urgently. Joy, let's talk about this, off camera. Joy shook her head firmly. No, Whoopi. This needs to be said publicly. I am resigning from The View, effective immediately. I will not be complicit in spreading the kind of dangerous nonsense that keeps humanity trapped in the dark ages. The studio erupted. Audience members were gasping and murmuring. The other hosts were trying to speak over each other, and the producers off camera were clearly in panic mode. But Jonathan remained perfectly still, watching Joy with what appeared to be genuine sadness. Joy, he said quietly, somehow cutting through all the chaos with just the tone of his voice. I'm sorry it came to this. I truly hope you find peace. Joy looked at him one final time, her face a mixture of defiance and devastation. Keep your peace, Jonathan. I'll take truth over comfort any day. And with that, she walked off the set, leaving behind one of the most shocking moments in daytime television history. As the cameras continued to roll, capturing the stunned faces of the remaining hosts and the bewildered audience, Jonathan sat back down, folded his hands in his lap, and waited quietly for whatever would happen next. That's the incredible story of how a routine promotional interview became the catalyst for one of the most dramatic exits in television history. What do you think about Joy's decision to quit rather than continue the conversation? Was she right to take such a dramatic stand? Or did she let her emotions get the better of her? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories like this one.